I'm Melanie McWhorter. I'm the Executive Director at Historic Santa Fe Foundation. I want to welcome you here for our talk with Jesse Roach. Thank you so much, Jesse, for doing this. Past, Present, and Future of Water Use in Santa Fe. So this is a series that we're producing on the occasion of exhibitions that are over here in the Edwin Brooks House or the Thaw Research and Education Center. The current exhibition is work by a woman named Sharon Stewart, and it's a Acequia work, the black and white. These are silver gelatins. She's been photographing there for about 20 years now in El Cerrito. And it's all primarily a lot of this is centered around the cleaning of the acequia. And then the back area there, the color work, that is work. She lives in Chacon. She's lived there long-term resident. She's from Texas originally. Had done Water in the West photographic project with about 8 other photographers, and a Toxic Tour of Texas is another project. So she's been doing environmental work for a long time. The color work is a post-fire from the Calf Canyon and the Hermit's Peak. And this show continues until September 26th. And we do have a dinner with her on September 18th. And I think, I'm still finalizing some of the details, but I think we're gonna do a screening of R.C. Chapa's Acequia film, which is available also on PBS if anybody does wanna watch it, but we'll have a much bigger screen than this one, and some wine and refreshments. And then Sharon will talk about this work and some of her experience in working around acequias. And then many of you have some of you are new faces who I've never met before. Many of you have probably also been to El Zaguan, which is where our offices are, right next door at 545 Canyon Road. Currently, we do have exhibitions over there that support local artists. And for those of you who don't know much about Historic Santa Fe Foundation, we could talk about it forever, but we're a member-based organization that focuses on preservation and history related to Santa Fe and northern New Mexico. Loosely, that's kind of like a very brief version. And now I want to focus on Jesse, what you all came here to see. Jesse Roach is a native New Mexican who grew up in Santa Fe. Jesse holds a bachelor's degree and master's degree in civil engineering from Stanford and a PhD from the University of Arizona in hydrology and water resources. He is the interim director of the City of Santa Fe's Public Utilities Department, overseeing the water, wastewater, and environmental service utilities. Jesse started at the city as a director of the City of Santa Fe Water in 2019 and moved to the utility department role in the beginning of 2025. He has pushed for data-driven operations, led development of water resource indicators to guide seasonal conservation policy, led a strategic planning effort, led development of a long-range water resources planning process, and provided leadership and support of new water resources development. Jesse was the technical lead in an assessment of potential climate change impacts to water resources and possible resulting changes to water operations in the upper Rio Grande Basin, and a contributor to the technical evaluation of water utility scale adaptation, maybe you'll tell us about that a little, to potential hydrologic impacts of climate change in Santa Fe. Very impressive resume. Please help me welcome Jesse Roach.
Thank you, Melanie, for that nice introduction, and thank you, Story and Melanie, for reaching out. And thank you all for your interest in water in Santa Fe. As I move through these slides, I'd be happy to take questions as I'm going that are clarifications on the actual material presented. The larger sort of theoretical questions, let's hold those to the end. And if you ask me a question about that sort of clarifying and I'm going to answer it later, I'll just say, yeah, cool, I'll keep moving, I'll answer that soon. But feel free. I think this is a small enough room, few enough people that if you see something that's confusing and I haven't explained it sufficiently on the screen, go ahead and raise your hand or shout. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the water system that we have here. We're very fortunate with the system that we do have. I'll talk about that a little bit. And then really past, present, and future. That's what this talk is going to be about. And actually, as Melanie was talking about the Historic Santa Fe Foundation, I realized I should have probably gone back a little further to the real dawn of the beginning of the utility. I didn't do that here, but if we have time, we can talk a little bit about, you know, the 1880 when it really started. I go back to 1925 in these slides. So the system that we have, and I think this room's small enough and my voice projects well enough that I don't need to stand too close to this. Can you hear me in the back? Okay, great. We have 4 different potable sources of water. So for a community of 90,000 people, that is incredibly fortunate. Mostly you would see communities much larger with 2, if they're lucky, maybe just 1. The Santa Fe River, the original. So this is in the order that they were developed to support the community. Santa Fe River, the city wells, the Buckman wells, and the Buckman direct diversion. And on this map, this is sort of an overview. The dark blue line is the Santa Fe watershed, Santa Fe River watershed. That means that any rain that lands within those, within these bounds sort of contributes to flow in the Santa Fe River. The Canyon Road Water Treatment Plant is where we treat the Santa Fe River water that's stored in 2 reservoirs up here. The city wells are within the city limits. The Buckman wells are 13 deep wells going out to the river. And then the Buckman direct diversion diverts water directly from the river. I'll talk about each of those sources a little bit more. There's also a non-potable resource. So the water that's used indoors and collected in the sewer system ends up at the treatment plant, the reclamation facility near the airport. And at the moment, that's used to irrigate golf courses and turf fields. Just kind of a quick couple photos of each of these sources of water. So this is a drone photo above Nichols, which is the first of 2 reservoirs that are in the upper watershed above the Audubon. So if you've been up to the Audubon, which I'm sure you all have, you'll see a gate that says closed, you can't go any further. If you went through that gate about a quarter mile, half mile further up, you'd get to Nichols. And then another several miles past that, you get to McClure. Nichols is the smaller of the 2, but looking downstream, past the Audubon to the Canyon Road Water Treatment Plant, and this is a bird's eye view of the treatment plant itself.
What year was Nichols built?
Nichols is 1942, and McClure was 1926. So next year, 100-year birthday for McClure. The city wells there's 7 active production wells. I apologize for this map. It's got observation wells on it as well, and it's just busy. We're working on a better one. The ones that are purple squares, for those of you close enough to see that, are the ones that we actually produce water from, and really only 4 of them. So the real workhorses for us are the Northwest well, which is in the La Tierra Open Space Preserve, or La Tierra Open Space. And then the Agua Fria well near the Indian School. A couple others that we use, but those 2 really are the ones we lean on first. And then the Buckman wells, and this is a drone photo looking back up to Santa Fe. So this is from the other side of the river. So upstream to the left would be Espanola. Downstream to the right would be Cochiti. And this is the location of the first 9 of those deep wells that were drilled in the 70s. There's 4 others that you can't see on this photo that are closer to the city. And then here you can actually see where the location of the Buckman direct diversion is, which I'll talk about on the next slide. But this is a ways away from Santa Fe, but this is a crucial piece of our overall water resources portfolio, these 2 sources. The Buckman direct diversion, this is a picture of it when it was under construction. There was a cofferdam keeping the river away. And so you can see there's 5 cells that were then covered with screens. Right here, I think they have steel on them, but at the moment they're covered in screens. Once the cofferdam was removed, the river flows next to that wall, falls into the screens and gets pumped. If you're really close, you can see sort of pipe ends in each of those, gets pumped to a lift station and then starts a 10-mile journey up to the treatment plant, which is kind of near Marty Sanchez golf course. So then this is a bird's eye view of that treatment plant. This is that treatment plant is city-county joint project.
So this is being diverted from the Rio Grande, is that right?
That's right. And one of the interesting aspects of that source is that on paper, the water that we're diverting, the water that the city diverts at the Buckman Direct Diversion is actually Colorado River water. And so the project that allows us to do that is called the San Juan Chama Project. And the reason it's called the San Juan Chama Project is there are 3 tributaries to the San Juan River, the Rio Blanco, the Little Navajo, and the Navajo River. And from each of those, there's a diversion, not a lake or anything. There's sort of a diversion into a tunnel that goes by gravity under the mountains to the next diversion location, to the next, finally 13 miles under the Continental Divide to the Chama side of things. And so that's why it's the San Juan Chama. It's tributaries of the San Juan dropping water into the Chama. No energy requirements other than, moving gates around to divert the water. Once the water's in the tunnels, we get all that water with no energy expenditure. 1970s, early 1970s, this project came online. And this is a way for New Mexico to take a portion of their legal right to the Colorado River under the Upper Basin Colorado River Compact. Yes, sir.
What percentage of water, Santa Fe's water comes from the project?
Great question. I'm going to say about half, and I'll get into that in a little more detail coming up.
There's a lot of things going on about that Colorado River Pact right now. It's one of the hottest issues in the West. Will the decision made on that be influencing the amount of water that is allocated to Santa Fe?
Yeah, and we'll talk about that further. So it's also a very insightful question, and we'll get to it. And if I don't answer it to a degree that's satisfying, then we'll keep talking about it. All right, so that's sort of the overview of the system. Let's talk about past. This is one of my favorite charts, and I probably put it up in every single talk that I give. And this goes from 1925 to 2025, so 101 years of water use data. The total colored area is the demand that was served, the amount of water that was produced to meet the needs of the community. And the color is representative of where that water came from. So it tells quite a few stories here. One of the stories is Santa Fe's here because the Santa Fe River's here. That was the only source of water up until a historic drought in the 1950s. So you can see the demand had started to grow. We hit the 1950s and suddenly there wasn't enough water in the river to support the demand that had grown up in the town. And sort of on an emergency response, wells were drilled within the city limits, and we started using a second source of water, which is wells. And that was sort of a historic drought. So then we proceeded until the 70s, and you can see also kind of a classic growth, an exponential growth here in demand, something that would not have been tenable forever. But the response to it in that time was, okay, time for some more water. And so the third of the sources was brought online starting in the 70s with the Buckman well field. But demand continued to grow. And then something very interesting happened in 1995. The city purchased what to that point had been a private utility. And I remember I was in college and grad school at that time, and at the time there was a lot of controversy about public systems becoming private, and especially internationally. But meanwhile, the city did the opposite, right? We took a private system and made it public. And I work in the government, so I know there's a lot of things we don't do well. But this is right here, I'm going to tell a story about something that went really well with a government taking over a monopoly. That's what a utility is. It's a regulated monopoly. From 1995 until 2025, something should jump out to you on this chart. We produced 13,000 acre feet. It's a funny unit. Don't worry about it. When we talk about annual water use, we use acre feet. It's essentially a foot of water on a football field, which is roughly an acre. That's an acre foot. We produced 13,000 acre feet that year to meet the needs of the community. In the last several years, we've produced between 9,000 and 10,000. And has the community gotten smaller in that period of time? No. So we've reduced our total water production by 1/3, and at the same time the community has grown by about 1/4. So how does that work? That's conservation, and I'll get into that in the next couple slides. But we're using water almost twice as efficiently now as we used it in 1995. So that's one of the real, I'm going to say, paradigm shifts that occurred when the city took over the private water system, conservation. The second one you can see here in the color scheme. This is groundwater mining. This is taking more water out of the ground than is naturally being replaced, being recharged. The water levels in the wells as a result of that are dropping out. This is unsustainable. And it's essentially taking water out of storage. You can't keep doing that forever. This is eating, sort of eating your seed corn, so to speak. In 2011, the Buckman Direct Diversion project came online, and I'm going to say part of the reason for that is this 2002. Until 2002, everyone talked about the 1950s drought as the drought that you wanted to plan around. That was the thing to worry about. 2002 came along, and it was the driest year ever seen on the Santa Fe River by far. And that woke people up a little bit. I mean, the conservation was sort of already in place, but we were still mining groundwater. And the Buckman Direct Diversion came online finally in 2011. And you see that the shift of color, we're now 80% of the time we use river water. And the other 20% is making sure that the wells are working and sort of filling in as we need it for the well. So that's sort of the second paradigm shift that has occurred in the last 30 years, is a shift to surface water or river water dominated production. And the difference between surface water and groundwater, there's many differences, but surface water, we really have a very good idea of how much we have, and it's replenished every year. Maybe not always to the same amount, of course. There's wet years and there's dry years, but we do know very accurately how much of it we have. So we think about that as our checkings account. That's what we want to live on. And then the wells, we understand fairly well, but not as well, how much water's down there, how hard we could pump it. And we try and save that for the years where the checking account is a little low. Go ahead.
Do you have an idea of what the recharge rate is on those wells that you're into net positive?
Yeah, and I'll get into that in a minute too. We do have, but it's a pretty round number because it's not to the level of detail we have for the reservoirs and the surface water. But yeah, it's about 4,500 acre feet, and I'll get into that.
So 80% surface water, 50% of that's from the Buckman diversion?
No, so here, I think in some years it is, and some years it's more, and it really depends on how much water we have available in the Santa Fe system. Because between the two, the Santa Fe River water is higher and it's of higher quality. So it's less expensive to treat. The Buckman water is lower and of lower quality, so you have to pump it 1,000 feet up. It's very heavy, obviously, and it's more expensive to treat. So we use that preferentially. Then we use the Buckman water. Even though the city well field water would be cheaper to us, we use the Buckman River water because that's the checking account. That's the water we understand. We're saving the other for when the checking account's not there. Yep. This is a zoom in then to just the 1995 to present, just showing these two things a little more zoomed in. I don't need to dwell on it again, but those are the three paradigm shifts. Conservation, conservation and then surface water dominated production. I'll get into the third later. I was jumping the gun. So the conservation piece, here's another way to look at conservation. So this graph now shows from 1995 through, this is 2024, the dark blue lines with the scale on the right are the estimated population served by the system. So you can see we are starting somewhere in the high 60s, 1,000 people served in 1995. If I read that right or no?
No.
Yeah. This is about 70,000. So a little below 70,000 served in 1995, up to now 90,000 served. And at the same time, if we take the total water production that year and we divide it by the population served, we get a metric called gallons per capita per day, or GPCD, and it is essentially the use that could be attributed to the average water user. Now understand, this is not what you're using in your house. This includes all the water that we produced, all the water that was used in restaurants, all the water that we lost through main breaks, everything to the number of people. But it helps us sort of compare ourselves to other systems. So we went from almost 170 gallons per person per day attributable to the average user, all the way down to below 90 in that 25 years. So this is tremendous conservation success. To kind of put that in context, this is a really old graph and it's not quite apples to apples, but the relative difference is what I want to show here. This was a comparison by USGS of how New Mexico compared to other Western states in terms of water usage. New Mexico's amongst the lowest. And then over here is in 2022, water use in New Mexico cities for water systems serving at least 10,000 people. And you can see, and this is again the GPCD, the gallons per capita per day, and Santa Fe is all by itself, the only one that's under 100 acre feet. 100 gallons per person per day. So we do deserve some credit. The folks before us deserve credit for really understanding how vital and crucial water is and conserving as a result. Some of the reasons for that: a tiered rate structure, where if you go into a second tier, there's a fairly strong price signal that is sent. A really effective toilet retrofit program. And then honestly, the people who were here and lived through the 2002 water wars, where there were bumper stickers on cars that said, "I'll stop watering my trees when Las Campanas stops watering their golf course." And when my mom, who's in the audience here, and I was away, but I would come visit, she took showers standing in buckets so that she could keep her trees alive. When you go through that, you understand the value of water. And so we've done a lot since then to try and put ourselves in a position where we don't have to do that again. But the water conservation ethic is strong in Santa Fe as a result of that. And then this is just another way to look at shifting to, surface water dominated supply. So this is in 1995, you see we used almost 8,000 acre feet of well water. And then since 2011, so this skips 15 years or so. But for the last 13, 14 years, you can see it's mostly been water from the rivers and trying to really protect the groundwater resources. And as a result of that, we have seen recovery in those well fields. So in the city, we started drilling the wells in 1950. And so before we started drilling those wells, there was sort of like almost a pre-development water level. By 2010, right before the Buckman direct diversion came online, the average depth to water in those wells had fallen by 150 feet. At the Buckman wells, it's even worse. This is because it's something called a confined aquifer. So this was really a measure of pressure, but it had dropped from 1970, when those wells started being drilled, dropped down by 600 feet by 2010. So we were mining our groundwater, and this was the result. Since then, the average water level in these wells, as we've rested them, has sprung back. It's come back 60 feet, so a little more than a third in the city wells. And it's come back 510 feet, so more than 80% in the Buckman wells, and that's sort of the pressure response. So we're seeing the benefit of that shift. And now we have healthy groundwater resources, for we know those years are coming. Occasionally there's going to be a year where there's no water in the Santa Fe River, and we're prepared for that. Yes, sir.
Is the city performing any artificial recharge of its aquifers?
I'm going to say not artificial, but for those of you who've been here long enough to have heard of the Target Flow Ordinance, also known as the Living River Ordinance, every year in April, the city, which was decided in the early, I think, the late aughts, early 2010, 2011-ish, we are going to go ahead and let some water go by. Some water up from these reservoirs, we're going to let a little bit of that go by for the benefit of the river. We could take that water, and we need that water. That's our most valuable water resource. But we have this new source in the Buckman directive version, and we're going to say we want some water for the river. And so every year in April, depending on how much snow is in the mountains, there's a number, a volume of water that it varies between 20-25% of the available water to us that is allowed to flow past the reservoirs as part of this living river. So that is, I'm going to say, the recharge that we're getting in the well fields is twofold. One of them is just by resting those wells, we're getting natural recharge and we're getting the recovery. But the other is this living river, having a wet river does end up infiltrating. And the river rarely makes it all the way to the airport or to the wastewater treatment plant. It will make it all the way occasionally in the spring and then in big monsoon events. But otherwise, it dries up before it gets there because it gets sandy and it can infiltrate into the ground and help the overall regional groundwater system.
How many acre feet do you release each year from those reservoirs?
It's a minimum of 300 in a 30% or less of average year, up to a maximum of 1,000 acre feet in a normal or above normal year. Okay, so then here's a way to start looking at one of the things that people wonder about is like how much water is, how much water we're using compared to how much water is available to us. The left side here is showing from 2011 through 2024 how much water we actually produced and used. So our demand was about 9,000 acre feet a year, and we used about 7,000 acre feet from the rivers and about 2,000 acre feet from the wells. What do we think was available that same time? A little bit more river water. Why is there more? Evaporation. We have reservoirs, we lose some of it to store it. And the living river. We allow some of it to go by. So that's not available to us. And then this is back to answering the question earlier. How much do we think we could pump out of our well fields? And this is year in and year out without impacting the long-term ability of that resource to sustain that rate. That's the number we're trying to estimate. And we estimate between all the wells about 4,500 acre feet per year. So we're using about 9,000. We have about 12,000. And so sometimes we say, we have right now, we're about 25% under our, long-term sustainably available amount. And we'll talk about if that's enough going forward or not and what we're doing about that in future slides. In fact, I think here it comes. A little plug for other resources that are available on our website. If you're really a glutton for this stuff or you just need something to help you fall asleep, our annual report is available on our website. And we try and make it readable. So if you're really a water wonk, you might actually enjoy it. A lot of the figures in here are from that.
I've got a really quick question.
Go for it, Mac.
Some of those sources of our water are shared with the county. And I'm sure when you do this arithmetic to come up with these numbers, it's really hard to take into consideration how much is county use or county resource and city. Have you looked into that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so the BDD is split with the county. So there's two answers to your question. The BDD is split between us and the county, but the water resources are each of ours to bring ourselves. So we bring our Colorado River water to that project, and then that project is where we divert it and treat it. That's the sort of benefit that it's providing. The county brings their own water resources to that is diverted and treated there. However, the county system is connected to the city system. If you just looked at the pipes and you didn't know anything about the politics, it's the same system. We're able to account for who's using what, but in an emergency, we are a backup for the county. And so in our long-range planning that we'll talk about, the county is a partner. We can't plan without them, and it can't be like, oh, the county can do whatever they want. We can't say that unless we're really basically going to say, okay, well, how often are you going to rely on us as your sort of backup supply? We need to know that. So yeah, that's part of the question, and we'll get into that a little bit more. Yeah.
And you showed that Las Campanas is also using water, and they have their own water utility.
They do, and that's Buckman direct diversion water as well. And so the diversion itself is split amongst the partners of City of Santa Fe, County of Santa Fe, and two different Las Campanas entities. The club, which is the golf course, and the co-op, which is the utility. So that's right. And then that water moves up the line, and then it splits off before it gets to the big treatment plant that I was showing. And so the big treatment plant is only city county, and so the water splits off there and goes to Las Campanas or goes up to the city county plant.
And they treat their own water then?
The golf course doesn't treat it. They use the raw water, and I'm not an expert on the co-op, but they must treat it. This is a chart showing, so this then is getting back to how much water. So in 2024, 43% of the water came from the Buckman direct diversion last year. A little more than a third from the Santa Fe River, and our in this case, 22% came from the wells. I would say if you were going to do a real rough, if you want a round number, this is where half of our water over the last 10 years probably has come from the Buckman direct diversion. Okay, a little bit of a quick look at the water conservation activities. I won't dive into this too much, but we have a 5-year water conservation plan. We're turning that into a 10-year conservation plan in the next year. Santa Fe 2100, I'm going to talk about more. This is our long-range water planning process that the county is part of with us. Some technical tools I'll talk about a little bit, one of them in specific. And we're sort of shifting to try and understand, like, how do we decide? We spend a fair bit of money on conservation. How do we decide where we spend that money? Are rebates the right thing to do? Or is it going in and finding high-use houses and helping them retrofit? And it seems like it's probably more the latter than the former, but we're trying to keep up with the best way to spend the money that we spend on conservation.
And this is particularly sensitive in Santa Fe. I spent my career in the restaurant business, and restaurants are notorious water hogs. And my experience, at least in the Bay Area, is that most restaurateurs are not particularly conscious of conservation or caring about it. Do you do specific targeting to the restaurant community here?
We do a little bit, but I'm going to say that here 80% of the water is residential use. And I'll get into the third paradigm, which is coming for us, which is the ability to reuse treated effluent. Means that I believe that most of our attention in the next 5 and 10 years is going to shift to outdoor water conservation. And so in that case, the restaurants aren't going to be real high on our list. It's going to be the folks that are using utility water outdoors. The water resources indicator, this is just something to show. It shows two different things. The idea here is to have a data-driven approach to seasonal conservation policy. And this is a number that goes from 0 to 10. 0 is catastrophe. 10 is, boy, we're whistling Dixie. Everything is just fantastic. And it's made up of 3 components. And I'm going to start from the bottom up. The 3 components are groundwater, and groundwater gets a sub-score of 4 out of 10, so it's the largest single weight. And it was at a 0 in 2000. We had hammered our groundwater resources. We were in trouble. And so there's no groundwater contribution to this until the Buckman direct diversion comes online and the well fields start to recover. The next score, 3 points for how much water do we have in storage in the reservoirs and what's our capacity to treat that water. Also pretty low because we only had the Santa Fe River. The Buckman direct diversion comes online in 2011 and it jumps up, and then it sort of is just kind of noisy depending on if it's a wet year or a dry year. And then this last gray piece is a piece that, you know, honestly, when I first came to the city, we sort of have a back and forth argument about conservation, because it's like, well, we've worked really hard and we're really in really good shape. We don't need to tell people to conserve. And it's like, people are like, no, it hasn't rained in 5 years. Like, we have to conserve, right? And no, and they're not wrong. So this is the drought monitor subscore. So the idea here is, if everyone's scared because it hasn't rained in 4 months, let's take advantage of that. And let's say, hey, things are, you know, we have some water in our reservoirs, but things are dry. We would like you to conserve a little bit more this year. And so these 3 things, and that's a 0 to 3. And so you can see, since Buckman came online and the well sort of recovered, we kind of bounce up and down between 6 and 9, depending on sort of how the local drought conditions are. And that's what we're trying to move into this score to be the driver and code of, you know, your drought responses. A brief mention of fire is something we think about a lot. In our long-range planning, we think about, okay, if there is a fire in the upper watershed, we could lose those reservoirs for 10 years, is sort of the experience that other utilities in New Mexico have had as a result of having headwaters burned. So we're working very hard at thinning those. We spend, you know, since 2020, we've done a lot of thinning and piling and burning up there, and I think we've come a long way. We're also now starting to thin stuff in closer to our in-town infrastructure, our tanks and our treatment plant, some of the lines that maybe aren't as deep, to try and make sure that we're, you know, not losing our water utility as a result of fire. We were called a model for water use efficiency in the West, so we are getting some good publicity on these efforts. And a couple, I'm going to spend a little bit of time here. Oh, I'm taking up a lot of time. On capital infrastructure projects. So Nichols, we're doing a huge $20 million project up there right now. It's addressing some safety issues from this 80-year-old dam and the outlet conduit. And it's going to give us the potential for hydroelectricity generation. That's very cool. It's also going to give us the ability to turn the plant off in the winter. Right now we can't, because the pipes are in the river and exposed, and we have to keep the water moving or they'll freeze. Now they're going to be underground. We'll be able to shift that. That's going to be really helpful for us. And there's going to be an aeration system in the reservoir that's going to help essentially start the treatment process in the reservoir, which will allow us to use less manganese in our treatment process. And for those of you who have been around for more than 5 years, about should be burned into my head. We had a summer where we were having these brownwater events, and it's a result of heavy manganese loading in the system from the treatment process. And it just got out of, we didn't even quite understand why, but suddenly people were calling with brown water. And if you run a water utility, that's the last call you want to take, is like, my water's brown, are you kidding me? So that's going to help us a lot. We have upgrades to the Canyon Road treatment plant, another $20 million roughly. We have a San Juan Chama return flow project. I'm going to talk about that. $50 million, a key resiliency project. We've got another $10 million at Canyon Road. I mean, Canyon Road treatment plant's getting a facelift. And as the main operator up there likes to say, we're going to have a lot under the hood up there pretty soon. So it's really exciting to bring that plant up to sort of modern standards. And then McClure, we have to do the same thing at McClure that we're currently doing at Nichols, another $20 million. Those are big dollar amounts. So what does that mean? Well, compared to what we've historically spent from 2013 through present, on average for capital spending, about $9 million. You throw those big projects together over the next 5 years, we're looking at tripling that, $30 million. Where's that money going to come from? In addition, we've seen inflation since the last time rates were changed, 41%. So our rates go 41% less far than they did in 2013. And I mentioned the large projects. We haven't changed rates since 2013. So we just passed, and for those of you who really follow water, you know we've had a lot of trouble with our wastewater treatment plant. We just passed wastewater. So if you're in the city this month and you were paying attention, your wastewater bill bumped up. And we're going to then come back with a proposal to raise water rates as well, effective in January. That's going to, yeah.
Where is the county treating wastewater? You know?
They have a plant at Quill, which is on the penitentiary. I think there's a plant now I'm blanking the name of the development that's out in that area. A smaller plant there as well. I think that's their.
Better shape
From a wastewater treatment perspective, they just renovated the Quill, and so I think at the moment they are in better shape. I mean, we were struggling, and we've gotten our arms around it now, but just today we're actually out there with a bunch of industry, and we're planning to spend somewhere between $100 million and $200 million on that facility to really make sure that we put this compliance in our rearview mirror. So this is what rates, and now this is the rates for all three utilities. So water on the bottom, wastewater in light blue, and then trash and recycling in dark blue. In 2013, for water and wastewater services, someone would have paid $60. In 2025, it's $65 because wastewater did have one increase in 2019. And inflation and the total bill in 2013 would have been $73. And the total bill, $87, because there was also increases for trash and recycling. But just if we'd kept up with inflation only, this $73 bill here would have been $110 currently. So when you combine the inflation that we haven't kept up with and these capital needs, you end up with, we need more revenue, we need to increase the rates. This is what the proposed rate structure will look like. This is for an average bill. So someone who uses on average 4,200 gallons of water a month and 2,800 gallons of water in the winter, that's how we determine what you're charged for sewer services. And so we'll go from 87 this year up to $104 on that bill per month. And remember, that still doesn't keep up with what inflation would have been this year. So these rates are intended to sort of be, reasonably gradual over time and keep us able to fund water and wastewater utility services at a level that we think this community needs to have. I guess one other thing to say about those rates is we haven't brought forward the specific water proposal, but we're actually talking about bringing in a third tier, so a very low use, middle use, high use, so that people who really use a small amount of water may see their bill go down even though the rates are increasing. So we're really trying to find a way to reward the low users and also make this less impactful on lower income folks with fewer financial resources. Okay, so now we're going to long range planning, and I think we're doing okay. The utility has done long range planning since forever. I mean, it was maybe a little more reactive when we were drilling the city wells or the Buckman wells, but there's been plans all the way through time. We started incorporating climate change into projections in 2015. We did a feasibility study in 2007. So we incorporated climate change in 2015, and the result was we are potentially looking at shortages by the 2030s. What are we going to do? And one of the low-hanging fruits identified was, well, 2/3 of your water is showing up again at the wastewater treatment plant, and you're not using it to offset potable demand. We're using it for golf courses and parks, but it's not really offsetting our potable demand. So this was a feasibility analysis on what would be the best way to reuse some of that water. And that gets us to the San Juan Chama return flow project. The idea of this project, so This map here shows the Rio Grande in the far sort of northwest corner, the city here, the Buckman direct diversion treatment plant. So currently, water's diverted in this dark blue line, pumped up to the treatment plant, treated to potable standards, then pumped to tanks around the city, and then it flows into folks' homes and businesses. About 2/3 of that water, on average, is used indoors, collected, and ends up down at the Paseo Real Water Reclamation Facility. The proposal here is just the water, and now we're sort of doing accounting of the water that we diverted, that we spent money to get from the other side of the Continental Divide through these tunnels, we stored in reservoirs. That water, any of that water, whatever's left of that water when it gets to this treatment plant is piped back to the river, dropped in the river right below the point of diversion for a return flow credit to allow us to divert more at that location. So the upshot of that is right now, if we want 1 million gallons of Buckman direct diversion water, our Colorado River water, we have to release over 1 million gallons because we have to account for losses from Abiquiu. And then we divert it when it gets to the Buckman direct diversion. And because we released our water from Abiquiu and diverted it here, there's no impact. The whole idea of this permit is there's no impact on the flow of the river below this point. We supplemented the river from up here. With the return flow project, the size of the arrows is proportional to the amount of water. The diversion is exactly the same size. On average, like I said, 2/3 of the water that we divert shows up at the treatment plant. So only 1/3 of the water that we're diverting has to be released from the upstream reservoir. The other 2/3 shows up in the river right below the diversion point. We're still leaving the river unimpacted from a quantity perspective at that location. We're using 1/3 of the water now for the same diversion. Said another way, our 4,000 or 5,000 acre foot annual allocation of San Juan Chama water goes 3 times farther with this. Now that's a big number. And what else is super interesting is that math gets crazy in our favor if we're able to shift from we only get 2/3 of the water back to 3/4. If we get 3/4 of the water back, we now get 4 times the mileage out of that same gallon. And I talked about summer versus winter operations at Canyon Road. In the winter, we get 95% of the water back. So we're going to be able to stretch that by 10 times in the winter. So if we really lean on the Buckman in the winter and we lean on the Canyon Road in the summer, we really have math. The math is doing us a favor, and we're really stretching that Colorado River water resource. So back to the question of what are we going to do if there's climate change risks on the Colorado, there's institutional risks on the Colorado. California is way bigger and way richer and way better healed than we are. What if they win? We are stretching the water, I think. We're stretching the water farther and faster than it's being taken away from us by either climate change or institutional risk.
The other nice thing about the return plan you have is that it's gravity driven and not electricity pushed.
Well, that's not quite true.
No?
It's almost true. It's almost true. So the treatment plant is in the Santa Fe River shed next to the Santa Fe River. We have to pump it uphill about 300 feet to get it out of the Santa Fe River. Then it flows downhill like 1,000 feet. So net, we might put hydroelectric turbines in that pipe. It could be a net energy gain for that piece of it, but remember, then we're just turning around and pumping it back uphill. So it's an energy loser. The interesting piece about it is that direct potable reuse, which most places in the country, that's treating the water right at the treatment plant to a level that you could put it right back in the pipes. There's a real ick factor to that to most people. I'll tell you in Santa Fe, people are like, why aren't you doing direct potable reuse? I was like, because the technology and the regulatory landscape is not quite there. At some point in the next 20 or 30 years, it could be, and this water that we're returning goes right past the Buckman direct diversion. So there's also potential for direct potable reuse at some point in the future. Okay. And so no change to flow in either case is the big takeaway. Okay, so now we're back to these graphs, these charts I already showed. This is what we have used, this is what we think we have. What does return flow do to that? What if we triple the amount of Colorado River diversion we have available? Now we're up at 20,000 acre feet available once this project's online. We're using about 9. That makes us feel a little better because we also have to be ready for unexpected supply disruptions, whether that's fire in the Rio Grande, whether that's fire up here, whether that's whatever it is. We like a buffer like that. It makes us sleep better. And then this is a graph that is a little wonky, but the mayor loves it, so I've brought it back into the presentations. What this is showing is a scale from dry to wet, where negative numbers are dry, positive numbers are wet. The 0 is sort of meant to be neutral. It's an index called the Palmer Drought Severity Index. And the orange line is a 10-year average of that index. And so it's sort of showing wet periods and dry periods and average periods and wet periods and dry periods. We're seeing an aridification trend since the 80s, the wet 80s here. And it used to be that we would argue in this period, we were saying, look, we've always been reactive. We expanded our reservoirs. We added city wells. We added Buckman wells when things were dry and dry. And then we were on this part of the limb and we're like, we want to do this next one before we have to. And then it turned down again. And so now we're just going to do it again before we have to. But we're trying to be ahead of it, and with the how long permitting takes nowadays, it's good that we thought we were ahead of things, because we're like 5 years into trying to get this thing permitted. And what that takes us to, though, is this was the near future. What about the further out future? There's a couple of impacts that we think are likely. We're likely to have less water because of aridification, because of climate change. And we have numbers for that. There are large models that we use to try and really put a number on that. And also increasing demand. If it's hotter, people might use more water, and also more people means more demand. So putting those two things together, what's the demand going to look like? What's the supply going to look like? That's our long-range water planning process. Before I jump into that, I'm going to just touch back on this third paradigm shift that I already mentioned. We talked about conservation, we talked about surface water dominated production, and then I mentioned that once we're able to reuse some of this effluent, we get a second bite at water that's used indoors. And so the focus goes away from trying not to use much water indoors to try not to use much utility water outdoors. Now, we also understand that it's a value is shade is something that people value. Shade and greenness, public greenness, is something that people value and people are willing to pay for. And so that doesn't mean we can't have canopy and we can't have some green, but we can think about choosing the right vegetation, getting it started with utility water, but trying to use rainwater harvesting and use utility water to keep it alive when it's really grim. But setting up something that's meant to really survive with rainwater ends up being hugely advantageous to the utility, because now the water's being used indoors and we get to use it again. All right, so this is our long-range water planning process. You guys are very patient. I'm almost done. We're 6 years in the making now. We kind of came out with this process. We did some actual public engagement. The orange is asking for feedback. The black is, hey, this is what we're doing, informational. We developed demand projections. We showed the model that we're using to put this demand and supply together. Supply projections this year, this is something that we have to wait on big science for. So it was supposed to be here, but we're waiting and rearranging. And this is the place where it gets exciting again. 2026, feedback values. What I'm talking about, the values we're trying to incorporate into our long-range water planning is how much water do we want flowing down the upper Santa Fe River? How much water do we want flowing down the lower Santa Fe River? And how green do we want our city to be? These are some of the trade-offs as you start to decide, do we have enough water? What do we do? What are the adaptation strategies we engage in? And that's where we need the public to help us develop the values by which we rate these different options. Yeah, I mentioned this is, I don't need to dive into this. We did show the model last year. We have information on our website if people are interested. This is pretty technical. And then supply projections we're hoping to show this year. And I made it to the end. You were very good. And so now, time permitting, I know it's already 4. So let me know, Story, and whether we have time for questions. I have time for questions.
If anybody wants to sneak out, they can sneak out.
Yeah, feel free to sneak out.
Otherwise, I think people are engaged.
Okay, Beverly.
So exactly what is the amount of water that we're allocated from San Juan, and how, it seems like that could change. It could even disappear maybe.
Okay, so on a full year, let me go back just, and should I repeat the question for this recording? Or, okay, so the question is how much San Juan Chama water is allocated and what's the potential future of that, and could it disappear? So I'm just going to go back to, I guess, this one. This dark blue swath shows how much San Juan Chama water we've used. And so you can see on a really good year, we use almost 5,000 acre feet. Our allocation in a full year is 5,230 acre feet. And when the project was designed, it was designed pre-climate change, and they designed those projects with a firm yield, which meant they had looked at the statistics, and they give you a number, which means you should always be able to get this much. And there's a reservoir there to help so that you can store it so Heron is where the water's stored. And we have seen shortages for probably the majority of the last 5 years. So it is not a firm yield anymore. The climate change models that we've run suggest that project is probably, well, there's a huge range, there's a lot of uncertainty, but the sort of number I would throw at it if I had to is a 25% reduction to that supply as a result of climate change. There's a minimum flow that has to go downstream to Colorado, so that's incorporated in those numbers. In terms of the institutional risk, we don't know. And I'm going to go have lunch tomorrow with some of the folks negotiating on the behalf of New Mexico to try and understand that. That's, I think one of the things we do in these planning runs is look at what if, and who knows how this might happen, but what if for some reason we couldn't let's say there was an earthquake and the last tunnel got crushed, and we suddenly have no San Juan Chama water for 5 years, 5 or 10 years. What does that do to us? That's the kind of what if scenarios we want to run with this model so that we can say, okay, all right, we'll have the well fields ready to go, but that's going to be something that would be difficult for us, and we're going to have to, reduce demand so that's the kind of questions we're trying to answer with this very cool model that we have of the system to show if this is the demand and this is the supply, where does it come from? How does it go? Let's see, you haven't asked a question yet.
What about growth? You mentioned that you've incorporated some way. Can you be a little bit more specific about that? And what about the issues of changing of what's city and what's county, and to what extent is that material or not material to all of the planning?
Okay, so the question is, what about growth? What about demand projections? What about the interplay between city and county as both grow going forward? How does that play? Is that a fair? So we came up with a very specific demand projection, and it essentially looked at previous population growth, and it estimates by 2100, and I showed that we're at about 90,000 served. Now I'm trying to remember. I don't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head. I should have brought that. It's a really good question. We have it on our website. We assumed a population growth that was comparable to historic. And then we also had to make an assumption about this GPCD, like how efficiently are we using water. And so we didn't assume it would keep going down forever. We assumed we could chip away at it a little bit further, and then at some point it would level out. And that's called demand hardening. At some point you can't keep asking people to save more water. They've grabbed the low-hanging fruit. There's not a lot left. I do remember that the upshot of both of those things together was a demand back towards, we're at about 9,000 acre feet a year now in the city. That was a total demand of more like 14,000 acre feet in 2100. So looking, that's sort of the upshot of it. Now, the county piece, the county has now upped, they have become a partner financially and with their personnel resources, and so incorporating their growth projections in is the next step, because as I said, it's really one system, and so you can't just be like, oh, well, we're fine if they're not fine, because we do owe them by agreement, I want to say 1,300 acre feet as a backup, and so we have to be ready to supply that at any time. One cool thing about the cooperation between the city and the county, which is very good, is I mentioned that the city uses Colorado River water at BDD. The county uses Rio Grande water at the BDD. And what's cool about that is there are actually times where we can't get San Juan Chama water out of Abiquiu because of flood control rules. And when that's happening, we use their native water, the Rio Grande water, because during flood control operations, by definition, there's a bunch of native water in the river. And then in the summer, they are constrained to how much they can divert when the river gets low. And the San Juan Chama water is not, because it's an imported water source. So during that period of time, we loan them back. So we have what's called a shared pool, where we sort of utilize the combined resources in the most efficient manner possible. We have benefited of late with water, essentially county water that wouldn't have been used, we end up getting to use. What they get out of it, though, is a pool of water that they can draw on if they need it. So that's an additional chunk of water that we have to be ready to give them back. So it's a good question, and we're trying to incorporate it, and using population growth and GPCD projections for both populations and a combined system. In the back?
First, thank you for the presentation. It's the first time I hear many of these information that were new to me. And it seems the projects are really prominent, not only what's happening now, but in the future, as you said. I have two questions. The first one, is this system, especially with the future plans for developing this project, will affect the traditional Sakia system and the community relaying model? And the other part of the question is, also we are dealing with the river, so is there also ecological threat to it when we are dealing with this water use?
So the question is, what do we see in the future, as maybe implied, as water becomes more scarce? What might impacts be on the acequia system and on sort of ecological resources along the Santa Fe River? I think that's a very good question. The way water rights work in New Mexico is priority date. And although the Santa Fe River is not what's called adjudicated yet, there's pretty much an acceptance that the acequias have a senior right. The exact magnitude of that right is probably is still to be determined. But right now we have a formal signed document with Cerro Gordo and Acequia Madre to provide a certain amount of water to their head gates. Now, it is sometimes limited by the available flow, because you imagine a situation where there are no reservoirs, there's no city, there's no nothing. They're still going to be limited to what's flowing that day in the river, whether or not there's water in the reservoir. So there's still that hydrologic limitation, but generally all of our planning efforts incorporate this acequias get their water first. So there are 2 other acequia systems on the upper river, though, that are not formally part of any agreement. And that's the Del Llano, which takes straight from Nichols, and so has always had sort of their ability to take that. We're working on trying to get a number, because it's just so much easier to operate if there's a number. And then the Moriah, which sort of has sprung back to life as a result of the Living River, and they use Living River. At the moment, there's not any sort of formal agreement there, but from a utility perspective, the Living River water is water that we've released, so if it's being used downstream by an acequia, that's sort of out of our purview, but it maybe goes to the next question, which is what about ecological or riparian water? And I think that's where the Living River is sort of, that's the piece of water that has been set aside by the governing body for recreational, environmental, ecological purposes in the river. And that's the number that we sort of plan around. Julia?
Yeah, you as a utility, can you designate to new developers to enforce landscaping that it does not really use a lot of water?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so the question is, can we force new development to be efficient, water efficient? And it's an interesting question because it's sort of 2 different parts of the city. There's land use and sort of building permits, and there's water use. And the 2 are connected by, in Santa Fe, fairly formally by water rights. So this is a little bit in the weeds, but I'll throw it out there for those of you guys who are interested in this. When the Buckman direct diversion came online, so the Buckman well field, we've had our San Juan Chama water since the 70s. The way we were going to get the San Juan Chama water was through the Buckman well field. If the river were leaky enough and connected to the wells well enough, we would have been able to release 5,000 acre feet down the river and just pump 5 or 10,000 acre feet from the wells, and it would have gotten there. What happened is the wells cratered. It wasn't connected well enough. So it was like, okay, we're going to spend a bunch of money now on a direct diversion so that we can get water straight out of the river. Well, guess what that meant? It meant, okay, in the state, you have to have a water right. If you're going to pump a well that impacts a river, you're now hurting potentially a downstream senior right holder. So the state will calculate. They'll say, where's your well? How close is it to the river? How deep is it? You say it's this, this, this. And how much are you going to pump out of it this year? Okay, I'm going to pump 1,000 acre feet. They're going to say, okay, we're running our model. That's going to hurt the river by 500 acre feet. You can't do that unless you have 500 acre feet of water rights. So you can make the river whole for that downstream senior user. We had all this San Juan Chama water, so it was not a problem. We're like, yeah, we're just going to pump the hell out of these wells. You tell us at the end of the year how much we owe the river, and we'll release it from our reservoirs. That's our San Juan Chama water. No problem. All good. It wasn't working. We build the BDD. Now we're diverting all that water, and we have no water rights for this large permit we have in the Buckman well field. Now, we don't want to let that go. That's a great asset to us. It's our savings account. How do we get water rights into the Buckman well field? We have developers bring them to us. And so if you're above a certain threshold, you have to bring us water rights, and that is a pain. And developers are not in the business of going down and finding some farmer who wants to retire and sell their water rights. That's the last thing they want to do. But that's what they've had to do, and so a little market has grown up around the few folks in Santa Fe and Albuquerque who know how to take advantage of this system of like connecting willing buyers and willing sellers and dealing with the onerous process of transferring a water right. It takes years. We had one we were working on for 3 or 4 years, and it was delayed so much and being protested by them, by the irrigators and by the pueblos, that the seller was like, forget it. And I'm going to go sell the land to someone who's willing to buy the land with the water right on it. So I digress a little bit, but that's how right now land use and water use are connected, is by this requirement to bring water rights. If you're below a certain size, you don't have to do that. You can pay us and we'll go find them. What's kind of cool about this return flow project is it's going to take away some of our reliance on those water rights and allow us to say instead, okay, you don't want to go buy and dry a farm in the Middle Valley. You can pay us and help us pay off this large project, because now we have more, our needs are in paying off this infrastructure more than building the water rights portfolio in the Buckman Wellfield. That's a long answer. I don't think I've even started answering your question. So,
Well, can they get it from the?
hold on, let me finish answering your question. So there is something called a green building code, which land use is working on to make sure that new development is very efficient. And then we're working on either making sure they bring us water rights or making sure they help us pay off the return flow pipeline. So the short answer to your question is yes, there are standards that require new development to be more efficient than existing development. And the long answer is it is connected to water by the water rights in the Buckman Wellfield.
Can they get it from a pueblo? Negotiate?
No, so the Pueblo's rights are being adjudicated right now, and so they don't really have rights to sell yet. At some point, presumably they could.
But they can't.
Not right now,
Okay.
no.
Just have some three hands go up, if we can do those three, and then we'll wrap it up, and if anybody wants to talk to Jesse afterwards, you can.
Perfect, okay, let's start with
This lady and Beverly, and then Jeff back here.
Okay.
How does the AES solar project, if it goes through on Highway 14, affect the Buckman diversion? Is that what's going to be used there?
My understanding of that project, and I'm out of my lane here a little bit, is that the water needs are fairly small. That would be a question for the county in terms of serving that. I think that might be in the county utility area. So I'd have to defer that question to somebody who knows a little bit more about the specific location and how they would get water.
Thank you.
Beverly?
So the return flow pipe, I'm curious about the estimated cost of that system, and also I'm worried about what that will do to the Santa Fe River Canyon, that it'll dry out and no longer be a riparian area.
Both good questions. The cost has continued to rise. The latest estimate we have is about $60 million. And the impact on the lower Santa Fe River is one of the reasons there were two reasons that we went only after the Colorado River water for the return flow. One of them is it made environmental permitting more simple, especially on the Rio Grande. And is essentially the idea is, hey, like we've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars developing this project because the Bureau of Reclamation built the project. We benefited from zero interest loans, but the project has now been paid off by the beneficiaries of the project. So we own the project. Bureau of Reclamation runs it. But there's a logical argument that says we have invested a bunch of ratepayer money in this project, and we've brought water into the system that wouldn't have been here otherwise. So we should be able to do whatever we want with that water. Now try telling that to a farmer on the lower Santa Fe River who has enjoyed the fact that we've been, putting lots of water down the Santa Fe River for years. If we only do the Colorado River water, return that, and we focus on that return during the winter for the mathematical reasons I mentioned, and shift our production of Canyon Road water and well water to the summer, which is our peak demand system, then we have more effluent available down there that's not San Juan Chama water and is available for the existing non-potable reuse, so the golf courses and the fields, and a downstream flow. As we went through the process of getting the return flow credits from the State Engineer's Office for this project, which we do have, we signed an agreement with the Wild Earth Guardians, essentially conceptually saying, we're going to keep the river wet in the summer, for sure, to the La Cienega Springs. So our conceptual model is that the La Cienega Springs water upwells there and keeps the river wet from there down, and that's why there's farms in that area. We want to make sure that we keep the river wet during the irrigation season above that. So that's what we're committed to doing with the project in order to keep the lower Santa Fe River vibrant for those folks who live down there. One other?
Do you study other cities' land and water use to model and plan?
I don't personally, and I think probably that's an area ripe for analysis and evaluation. And occasionally we do go to these conferences that are about land and water use planning. I think I'm not an expert on that. And so
is Santa Fe unique, I guess, completely unique?
not completely unique, but to some degree, I think the way we've I think generally I would say utilities feel like if somebody's bringing new water demand to our system, they need to figure out how, they need to pay for that at least, or actually bring it. So I don't think we're super unique in that concept, but this idea of if you're over a certain size, you have to go get a water right and transfer it into our well field, that may be fairly specific and unique. But I don't know how the landscape of other cities doing it compares. So I'm happy to stay and chat. Thank you all for your time.